Abruptly, things began to change. Without warning, the train, which had hitherto seemed like a promise of safe passage, grew thick with the dangerous scent of an escort convoy. They're making adjustments to the train? What's up with that, Siam? I didn't hear that announced. I've never heard of that happening mid-journey.
The problem is with the rails. The ones been running on are standard gauge. Past this point, the tracks were all 15-24mm broad gauge that were installed with assistance from the Russians. In order to run on the new rails, each of the train cars needs to be lifted up in sequence so their wheels can be replaced.
The wheel exchange made for an extended delay. Each car in turn had to be removed from its couplings. Then each car was loaded onto a lift and refitted for the broad gauge tracks. This is gonna take a while, I grumbled. I wish we could just transfer over to a train that could head on from here.
Well, passengers on this train aren't rich enough to complain about a delay in the schedule. And this way, the rail company doesn't need to change up the cargo. So long as the train and the passengers arrive safely at the destination, that's all that matters.
Yeah, I suppose we of all people have no cause for complaint. But, Siam, I sensed that there was more going on than just the switching of the train's wheels. The train was being expanded. A freight car, clearly meant to carry goods of higher quality, was being added, sandwiched between a pair of passenger cars. A total of 3 new cars were added. The only passengers in the 2 compartments surrounding the freight car were armed soldiers. They're all in the same shade of blue. 7 soldiers per car, total of 14. Were you expecting this?
No, I hadn't thought this far ahead. Adding a new freight car, huh? Honestly, this would have been difficult to prepare for ahead of time.
They were seeing a complex plan unfold. One that would be traceable after the fact, but which might be impossible to stop while it was in motion. We now faced a significant force of enemies that we might have to neutralize using only the firepower we had on our persons. Based on the orders Siam had received, there was 0 chance we'd receive any backup. They're definitely soldiers. Can't tell what army, though.
They're soldiers disguised as passengers, and if they're here with a freight car, it won't be an issue. The contents of those cars will tell us if they're Israeli soldiers or not.
I see. So all we know right now is that they're not on to us? Looks like they've decided that everything's safe.
Our only stroke of luck so far.
The freight car transfer cast everything into doubt. It seemed to confirm that there was indeed weapons delivery taking place. But recovering the payload was going to be more difficult than we anticipated. The train transfer process finished without a hitch. The other passengers paid it little heed. Evidently, they were accustomed to this sort of delay. Quite the fix our clients put us in. Can't call for backup and we don't have a chance to resupply. Fanatics never are very good at planning ahead, I suppose.
Or even stopping to sniff the air once in a while. Damn hardliners.
At last, the train left the border behind. There were no planned stops between the frontier and Amman. Siam and I needed to complete the job before the train arrived in Amman, which meant within the next 4 hours. The odds were 2 against 14. The difference of power so great it seemed absurd to even consider a plan of attack. You Zaim messed up in assigning this mission, Siam. This isn't a job for two people. Given how black things are, we should just destroy the whole payload. We should have just planted some semtex back where the train was stopped.
That would be dramatic, but effective. If annihilation was our job, I'd have leaned that way too.
We checked the cars pretty thoroughly before we departed. Sneaking something aboard the freight car would possibly have been close to impossible. So what do? Take 14 soldiers head-on is a bit of a tall order.
No, we're not going to take that big of a gamble. If you're worried about our numbers, that's going to change. Someone else is joining up with us here.
Huh? I was shocked. I felt an unfamiliar kind of fear. As far as I knew, Siam never teamed up with anyone but me.
Kyle.
Pardon me, but I'd like to share your seat. The others are all occupied by men, and I'd prefer not to sit with them.
As soon as the stranger spoke, I saw Siam's color shift to a pale, pale blue. A bad sign.
Pardon me.
The newcomer repeated.
I'd like to share your seat.
Her voice was low. The muscles in her arms were taut, like corded rope. To my eyes, her visage was a complex meld of shifting colors. Is this? It went without saying. This was our sole reinforcement, our third teammate.
We don't mind. Please, sit.
Thanks. Say, mind letting me have your spot, miss? Children should sit next to their guardian. I should be in your place.
I sighed.
Is that me?
I think that's you.
Yes.
Okay. Sam, is this young lady hard of hearing? Or does she just not speak Arabic?
Come sit next to me. This is one of our employers, the one who provided our intel. She's an old friend of mine.
I said nothing. But I did get up from my seat and sit next to Siam. I'd do as he asked, though I don't trust this one. I don't like the way he'd said old friend. Brought up all my natural cynicism.
Charmed, I'm sure. Is this kid your backup, Siam?
No, I'm the protection this time around. She's more suited to offense. Her skills are the real deal. So is her attitude. But she's not lookout material. She only really gets going when there's someone to fight.
Well, well. So she's still in training.
The woman regarded me with a cold gaze. She gave the impression of a snake trying to sense the body temperature of potential prey.
She's cute. I approve. How's her left arm? Can she move it all right? Or has your little lady in training not learned how to take care of herself yet?
I glared sidelong at the woman. I wasn't offended by the remark itself. The fact was that my left arm was still in pain. What unsettled me was this woman's powers of perception, able to detect my injury through the heavy cloak I wore. It's just a scratch. Won't be a problem.
Okay. But how did it happen? Did you get injured before or after you boarded the train? That'll tell me whether you're just half a soldier or simply a fool.
I didn't reply.
The silent treatment, huh? Hey, CM, which is it?
He didn't answer. Had she seen something in that silence?
Of course.
The stranger could read Siam's silence better than anyone. Better than his own partner. The woman's stoic face grew just a shade brighter. Her smile was entirely sarcastic, but at least it was a display of human emotion. It was a smile as if to say, "Well done." As if my injury were some fated thing.
I'm guessing she's a war orphan? Seems you don't learn either. How long since you started working on her?
Took her in 2 years ago.
2 years ago. 2003. The Middle East. A war orphan. All that information taken together left no question about just what battlefields I'd seen. The Iraq War. I'd lived through the long night of a war that, for the winning side, had been little more than a display of overwhelming resources and overwhelming technology.
That's a relief. She's only half a person, but at least she's ready. I'm looking forward to seeing her skills in action. If you brought her along, Siam, her training must be sufficient.
Now that she'd inferred my background, the woman's enmity seemed to abate. Our initial reluctance to trust each other had apparently been mutual. I wasn't necessarily happy, but if this was the team Siam wanted, I would accept it. As the woman had observed, I'd been trained by Siam after all. And Siam's judgment was absolute. I knew him as my instructor and mentor, the ideal soldier, utterly reliable. I turned my gaze away from the woman and looked out the window. The passing scenery drew out my memories of the life I'd lived over the past few years. A girl who had lost all her relatives to war. The tale of a child who'd never held a gun before, becoming a full-fledged soldier at the heels of a veteran mercenary. All of it came hazily drifting back into my mind. All the life I'd had before was taken away by the war. The echoing of gunfire in the distance, the sound of buildings ablaze. I can't help but think how much smaller and simpler those sounds were than I'd imagine them to be from stories. No place seemed safer to me than my house, and it was reduced to a ruin by a single artillery shot. A few moments after the blast, a group of strange men came barging in. I could hear their heavy footsteps, their coarse voices muttering.
Emilio,
They're
wait. Or is this you?
I think this is someone else.
Emilio, go for it.
They're dead! They're dead! We've killed them! We've killed them!
Luckily for me, my father had been thinking quickly and had sent me into the basement. Unluckily, he and my brothers were still in the living room when the blast hit. It wasn't just the furniture that was now gone without a trace. I sat in the basement, thinking. From the men's conversation, I realized that they were looking Something had clicked in my mind as I listened. I committed to memory how many men there were, what their voices sound like, what names they called one another, so that I would never, ever forget. Focused on hearing their every word for the next hour, I felt neither fear nor boredom. I gathered that there was no trace of my father's body, and they had found my older brothers. Satisfied, the soldiers left. All of this happened when I was 12 years old. Trapped under the rubble, it was days before I was rescued. I'd lost my family and any place to belong. The adults who found me realized I'd suffered emotional scarring, but they didn't have the time to bother with that. They're dead. This is Emilio again.
Emilio, go for it.
They're dead. They're dead. We've killed them. We've killed them.
Yes. There are too many things one needs to do in life. In my case especially, I expect I'm going to be overworked. It was quite simple, the reason I took up arms. It was not atonement that I sought, but equal compensation for what I'd lost. Unjust usurpers. Deeds whose cost was reckoned in blood. I've still not been paid what I am owed. The balance must be settled. I only ask as much as they took from me. That is why I carry on, never resting, with the relentless precision of a machine. It is simply a tale of sorrow, giving way to resentment, giving way to cold reason. Was it odd that I never felt malice? Perhaps I could see too clearly. I could see things on a broader scale than others. I could see where the evil was, where the flaws were. I could see it all so clearly that I was dumbstruck into sheer objectivity. The weak are evil. My family, my father, people I should have been proud of, had too many flaws. People of conscience, who esteemed a righteous society, who embraced complicated and contradictory things, who tried to become good sheiks. Their many failings created enemies, invited war, and brought on their death. Violence was a vulgar thing, far beneath the cultured behavior of my father and brother. But it still had the final word over them in the end. We may have been cruel to those who would shame us, yet we had tolerated too many of these foreign invaders. Balance is key. One must clad oneself in complexities, yet be simple at the core. Taking action always requires a first step. If someone takes from you, you take it back. If they kill you, you kill them back. Action and reaction. We should have thought more simply. By perceiving everyone different than ourselves as our enemies, we brought on the war long before it was inevitable. Even if my father and brother had been operating in a vacuum, they probably would have done the same. But every family has so many kin to hold dear, so many others who cloud their perspective. Except for me. Ha! My family and my kin are utterly gone. Apart from the determination I already possessed, I knew I needed to hone myself. My growing skills as a soldier were necessary for me to achieve my goals. And more basically, necessary for me to even survive. My goals. In the beginning, that was all I really thought about. Once I'd become an orphan, I resolved not to rely on anyone, My trauma wouldn't let me trust anyone else. And yet eventually, I wound up feeling a sense of trust for this man who found me and committed 2 years to training me. It was something I never thought I'd feel again.
There probably isn't anyone around with the patience to train a complete novice. I wasn't qualified, but I wound up sticking with you.
Sam was always more freelancer than soldier. He belonged to a liberation movement, but he made his living taking on jobs as a reliable mercenary. I guess his role gave him a lot of freedom because, unlike Grunt, who simply fired guns, he was allowed to act as a sort of instructor. He had no close ties within his organization, which was convenient for me. I'd taken up arms not because of any ethnic conflict, but for my own personal cause.
I'm being compensated for teaching you, but that doesn't make this some kind of formal contractual arrangement. Neither of us should waste the other's time. If I decide you're not suited for what I'm teaching, I'm calling the deal off.
Luckily for me, Siam ignored my unique background and upbringing. Simply trained me to be a fighter, growing as an instructor along the way.
Good firearms will not limit your abilities. Automatic weapons act as equalizers for soldiers on the battlefield. If both sides have equal technology, then everyone is theoretically capable of the same things as everyone else. Conversely, if you have a gun that isn't up to modern standards, you'll be weeded out first. The first thing you need to learn is the skill to tell whether the weapon in your hands is superior or inferior.
Guns are simple, not nearly as complicated as people. You just pull the trigger. My father had handled weapons occasionally, but never showed me how to use one. Political struggle was his preferred form of conflict, and in the end, it was that bias that defeated him. I took up guns to avoid repeating his mistake, but also the feel of a metal grip in my hands seemed to suit me. At least, that was always how it felt to me. Maybe my fondness for weapons was deliberately ingrained into me by Siam's instruction.
Don't forget that you're a woman. However superior your skills may be, you cannot change your physique. If you're facing multiple opponents with a pistol, shoot at the nearest target twice. Even if you don't hit, pivot with your knees and fire at the next enemy. Keep them all engaged. Don't let them get close.
I mastered the basics that first year. I say this not out of any excess pride or self-confidence, but I was measurably the best of the soldiers, other than Siam himself. After that, Siam and I began working jobs together. Siam was against it at first, but I had the ability, and he at least had the objectivity to acknowledge that fact. He was an exceptional teacher, and I was an even more exceptional student. I was an ideal subordinate, an inhuman combatant willing to use whatever I deemed useful to get an edge. I had countless brushes with death out on the battlefield. The reality of war is that people die, regardless of their talent, their experience, their abilities. I ought to have accepted that reality when I lost my family, but it was the battlefield that made the truth completely clear. The society into which I've been born seeks to assign value not just in monetary terms, but for individual dignity and even ideologies. But only death is truly impartial. I was able to survive through all of this largely thanks to Siam's aptitude. He wound up protecting me countless times when my inexperience put me in peril. His intervention was not out of any fondness for me, but but rather a cool calculation in the interests of completing the mission. He knew I could be counted on. Never much to look at, he accrued even more scars in the course of rescuing his risk-prone student. There was almost no place he hadn't been shot, except somehow in the head. Maybe there was a trick to that. I'd wanted to ask him secretly, but there was no allowance for questions while he was my shield. I could only make such small talk once his time as my proctor. I could only make such small talk once his time as my protector had come to an end. And even then, up until this very moment, there'd never been a good time to ask. I just wound up believing that Siam would never die. That no matter how many times people opened fire on him, he simply wouldn't get hit where it really mattered. That was probably a delusion on my part, of course, but the fact was that he just didn't die. Of course his heart had already died some time before. Bullets couldn't kill someone who was already dead. He deserved my trust. We were of the same breed, he and I. Siam would always have my back, no question.
Every once in a while, a truly exceptional soldier turns up. Superhuman. Keep up your mercenary career long enough, you'll run into one sooner or later.
My training was complete. I was no longer a student, but a mercenary. And this is what Siam had to tell me? I responded with sarcasm. What was this, some Hollywood script? Siam had never really joked with me before.
No science fiction. This is as real as it gets. On the battlefield, individual gear and skills can only carry a soldier so far. Death comes for us all, equally. My turn to be next. After that, might be you know? But in the midst of all that sort of deadly equality, there are monsters who can overturn the balance.
Siam went on to tell a story of two soldiers, one wielding a revolver and one an automatic handgun. The wildly anachronistic revolver was no match for the automatic. Even disregarding magazine size, a higher rate of fire meant superior firepower, period. A machine pistol capable of firing 3-round bursts would turn the revolver user into Swiss cheese.
Not about the technical limitations of the revolver versus the auto. It's about our awareness of those limitations, and at the same time, about our own limits as soldiers.
Siam went on, talking about how similar weapons could equalize the abilities of soldiers, and about those who had removed that collar from themselves and deviated from that equilibrium. For instance, the unparalleled gunfighter capable of rapid fire, like that scene in a Hollywood Western, a type of character who'd actually existed. Experts who could fan the hammer, unloading 5 shots at a target in the span of a single second. Of course, simple rapid fire alone wasn't worth fearing, had to be accompanied by the skill to put it on the target. Siam had probably just been trying to offer an explicit example of a time when exceptional human skill could surpass the capabilities of the available hardware. It had all seemed too fantastical, but he had been dead serious. Apparently he'd run across such rule breakers in the past.
Born warmongers, patron saints of small arms, lucky souls, people with different physical capabilities than you or I. Natural differences in physical prowess, sure, but also talents perfectly suited for war, maestros of the battlefield. Soldiers far outside the norm who can accomplish things no single soldier should be able to. When you meet an enemy like that, it's like staring down a storm.
Still, even according to Siam, such supermen could only deal with 3 or 4 opponents within any given moment. So assuming you had 5 or more to attack them in the moment, there'd be no problem taking them down. I was relieved. He wasn't talking mere fiction, but he also wasn't telling some joke. So then what was his story all about?
You're not a super person, but you are superb. And moreover, you know yourself. Still, that's all the more reason to be on your guard. Don't misjudge your body's limitations, and don't depend too much on your own skill. You are complete. So long as you have a proper grasp of your own capabilities, you won't be defeated.
Thus did Siam acknowledge my ascendance to the status of a warrior. It was an achievement to be proud of, to be seen as his sole peer, as a combatant, perhaps even his better. More than anything, the esteem I held for Siam was a reflection of the esteem he showed me. We were the same. That's why, when the time came, I had scarred my left arm. I wanted a physical symbol of our connection. Introductions were a simple affair. Sam had no need to give his name. I had no interest in the woman's, and the woman seemed satisfied with what she knew of the other 2.
Shall I just call you Siam and young lady then?
The newcomer asked. Sam shrugged.
If you're okay with that, what name are you going by now?
Yes. I suppose we'll need... yes. I suppose... Is it working?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
we
can
can
hear
hear
you.
you.
Okay, my mic isn't lighting up. That's weird. Okay, sorry. Yes. I suppose we'll need to coordinate. How does Kanan work?
I couldn't suppress a sound of irritation. I tugged wordlessly on Siam's coat, like a pouting cat staking a claim to what it wanted for its own.
Sorry, but that might pose a problem.
Siam replied.
I'm joking.
The woman said.
I'm actually going by Sadaqah these days. Now then, shall we get down to the matter at hand?
Sadaqah explained how the job would unfold. We'd wait until the train had traveled for an hour beyond the border before moving against our objective. Hopefully we could finish the mission an hour before the arrival in Amman. I peered at Siam's face as he and Sadaqah spoke. His color was, as always, blue. That shift earlier to an unluckier color, the cloudy whiteness of an unfamiliar stranger, had lasted for only a moment.
Our objective is in the freight car, number 3.
Sadaqah explained.
7 guards apiece are stationed in cars 2 and 4 to either side. It looks like 2 of the guards from car 4 leave to patrol the back end of the train at set intervals. And speak of the devil.
Without even shifting my gaze, I could confirm the presence of 2 soldiers moving the car in which we sat. 2 blue blotches passing by. The color of alert escorts. A rending, inorganic blue. The color of fighters skilled in the use of guns they carried. People who wear this color usually rubbed me the wrong way. Just being near them made me uncomfortable. Siam was a contradictory counterexample. Despite his dangerous hue, he eased my nerves. But whether the colors expressed themselves as painful or gentle didn't mean anything. The colors were merely colors. Whether warm or cold, everything was done neatly in simple colors, as if painted with run-of-the-mill materials.
The last car on the train is also a freight car, but everything in there is ordinary goods. If worse comes to worse, we could conceivably hole ourselves up in there.
Sadaqah said.
Of course, if someone were to toss in a tear gas grenade or something, we'd be done for.
Let's try to stay away from any direct conflict.
Siam said.
The orders were to avoid both casualties and eyewitnesses.
Agreed. We infiltrate the freight car. The enemy won't know we were ever here until the train arrives in Amman, and we're already long gone. Over and done. Perfect.
Let me just confirm then.
Siam replied.
We've established that they're transporting the weapon. Now our objective is to recover it and get out. Any changes to that?
None. You do your part, and I'll do mine.
It had been just over 5 hours since we'd boarded the train. I felt a sense of relief that at long last the action I'd been anticipating would finally commence. Our objective was to recover the parcel in the freight car towards the front section of the train. We'd infiltrate the car without alerting the guards, acquire the payload, and then disembark from the train as if we were just normal passengers. Top priority was acquiring the item. Secrecy was secondary. If it turned out we needed to take the payload by force, we'd been given permission to initiate combat. Violence was definitely on the table. If it came to it. If we were detected, we'd wind up in a 3-on-14 shootout aboard a train. Okay, I said. I know what you and I are doing, Siam. What's her job, though? Why is our sponsor even here in the first place?
He's a code-breaking specialist. Ordinarily, they wouldn't have sent the sponsor personally, but time was of the essence. When the plan fell into place yesterday, she was the only operative available to make the rendezvous.
And so they sent a code breaker?
Don't be like that. She's an expert at what she does. This will be a good experience for you.
How not like you, Siam.
Sadaqah said.
I guess the rumors about you going soft over some kid were true.
She's just causing me an epic amount of trouble. Why? Is that the sort of story that's been going around?
No. We just heard that you picked up some extremely capable individual named Kanan. I didn't expect she'd be like this young lady here, though.
Well, I didn't know someone like you was our sponsor, I replied. Not that we've seen much of you over the past 2 years.
You've got the wrong idea. You've got the wrong idea. I'm only one of your many supporters. I'm not a mentor. I don't have the time to play an individual part in every little scuffle.
But you've got time to show up in person for a job like this?
As it happens, I do.
Sadaqah replied.
I was already nearby, dealing with another matter. And given the details of this mission, I couldn't simply ignore it.
I wish you had. Siam and I can handle this on our own. The enmity between the two had become like a steady rhythm, driving along our conversation. It did make us interesting to listen to, for better or for worse.
What do you mean by another matter, Sadaqah?
Siam asked.
Were you here because there was some problem?
Oh? I was intrigued. Siam wasn't the kind of person to ask irrelevant questions. Had he twigged something that might affect the mission? Whatever the case, Sadaqah smiled pleasantly.
An issue cropped up in one of our projects. I've been looking into the personnel involved, along with a flaw in a weapon. Here's an example. How would you feel if you were dealing with a gun that you expected to be quite lethal, but which an observer claimed had no effect whatsoever?
What's that supposed to mean? You're not talking about a flaw there, I said. That would just be a completely defective piece of hardware.
Yes, young lady. Exactly. When there's a defect in something you've already trusted, it affects that trust. You could ignore it and hope it won't cause you trouble, but you're better off ridding yourself of something that isn't up to snuff. When such a situation arises, I head on site, assess whatever problems there are, and recommend appropriate courses of action. It's a boring job. These days I'm basically a maid. Less a code breaker and more a risk breaker, you could say.
I see. So you act all important, but that doesn't change the fact that you're just running errands.
Through a battlefield, yes.
Sadaqah brushed aside my insult with an air of confidence. I scowled. The woman was so sure of herself. I turned away and gazed out at the scenery outside. Then I realized the sack I'd been gnawing on was gone. Siam, I hissed.
Take it easy, Kanan.
Siam said.
I know you're under a lot of stress.
Siam,
Sadaqah interjected.
do you mind if I interrupt real quick?
So long as you keep it quick.
Sure. So I noticed that your partner has been nibbling on something. What is it? Some kind of new snack?
That's right. Want to try some?
Without saying anything, Sadaqah took one of the offered treats. She tore open the paper wrapper on one end, then stuck the contents between her teeth like a cigarette, just as I had. I watched her resentfully, knowing what she was tasting. A simple, unpretentious sweetness. The purity of concentrated sugar.
Sugar?
Sadaqah said.
Is that really all this is?
Yes, hardened sticks of sugar. They're dried and formed into shapes. We've become big fans ever since we found them at a market. Nowadays they use injectors to shape them. The best ones come from Japan, I hear.
I focused on gnawing my own stick, not really listening to Siam's explanation. There was a brief silence. Sadaqah let out a sullen sniff.
You have strange tastes. You really like these things?
Yeah, I like that there's nothing to get in the way of the flavor. Sadaqah raised an eyebrow dubiously. The time had come. We got up from our seats without a sound. Draped in our hoods, Sadaqah and I made our way through the train, doing our best to draw no attention. Siam had put together a timeline. We should spend no more than 30 minutes at most on our infiltration. In addition to the soldiers stationed in the passenger cars, it was possible that the enemy also had lookouts disguised as normal passengers. A seat left open for too long might arouse unwanted suspicion. The team needed to sneak into the freight car, obtain the payload, and return to our seats without a single minute wasted. Siam was too tall and muscular to be well suited for infiltration. He would hang back and act as our rear guard, and if the operation was discovered, his task would be to secure an escape route for us.
We're in position.
Sadaqah called in on one of the tiny voice-activated radios that we carried.
Synchronize watches.
She and I prepared to make our way up to the final objective in the freight car up ahead. Despite our clashing personalities, we moved almost like twins as we went about our work. It was evidence that our training had instilled us with similar priorities.
Just so I'm clear on this,
Sadaqah said.
all you're bringing is that Beretta and one spare magazine?
Yeah. Hope you're okay with that.
Yes. If it comes to a firefight, I'll let you handle shooting back. My job here is code breaking. As long as I have my PC and someone to cover me, I'm good.
Both of us were going in with a minimal loadout. As a covert agent in enemy territory, that made me uneasy. But then if a fight did break out here, the mission was already a partial failure. The organization couldn't spare equipment for a team that only needed it if we fouled it up. Have you checked the route? I don't know which one of us is which.
The route's fine as long as you're fine. This isn't going to be desk work.
Not my specialty, but an acceptable level of risk. This isn't my first rodeo. What about you? You ready for this?
I've ridden my share of wild horses.
I think that's Kanan's voice, just one of Japanese actress just sounding young.
Okay. I've ridden my share of wild horses. Once I get on, I don't fall off.
Quite the swashbuckling little heroine, aren't you? Let's get this circus started.
The garb that we wore under our cloaks was quite different from the norm for Middle Eastern women. Aside from the fact that one wore red and the other black, our outfits were rather similar. Both of us had dressed for maximum freedom of movement.
No problems with the infiltration route.
Sadaqah reported.
We're on the move.
With all the casual air of a traveler going for a stroll without any hesitation whatsoever, she headed for the outside of the train.
No problems with the infiltration route. We're on the move.
The call cut out. When you're on the team, would retain radio silence except in cases of emergency. As our backup, Sam had to decide on a course of action. He could try making his way through the inside of the train, heading straight towards the sequestered freight car. It would make him obvious, but that would at least draw the guards' attention onto him for a time. He had no intention of trying to get to the freight car itself, of course. His goal would simply be to draw the guards' eyes. He could claim to be on his way to meet up with friends. The guards would be sure to intercept him and try to usher him away from the freight car. While that was going on, Sadaqah and I would hopefully be able to sneak inside. But it seems that wasn't going to be an option. There were no ordinary passengers in cars where the guards were posted. The things they were protecting was what Sam thought it was. His guards would be good. Any unusual action he took would provoke them, and only heighten their alertness. He didn't want to do anything to complicate things for us. He decided that his best course of action was just to stay ready in case things would have us up. He checked the gun he'd hidden near his feet. Then he pictured in his mind the guards in the nearest compartment, their builds, their gear, their positions. Veteran fighter though he was, he could think of no good way to make up for the sheer difference in numbers. The fight did break out, it would still be 1 against 7. To break through an enemy position held by soldiers who knew what they were doing, he'd have to completely abandon his own better judgment.
Those who are willing to rise above themselves can overcome any stroke of luck.
He was reminded of a story he'd been told as a student, a fable involving a board game. Life was represented by the board. It was a clear, defined endpoint. One proceeded toward that end, but dire pitfalls had been set up on the way to the goal. It was a valuable lesson. One shouldn't have a goal in life. Or rather, one shouldn't think of the end as the goal. The proper way to live one's life was to realize it was already over. One must focus on the moment. A game of striving for the goal, for the end. That was just a way of rushing headlong toward one's death. The priorities were backwards. One shouldn't have a goal in life. One shouldn't seek meaning in oneself. To seek reward, to seek proof that you've lived by achieving some hypothetical endpoint, that was a fool's game. Siam's ability to live without hunting for such proofs was one of the very few things on which he prided himself as a mercenary. Slipping his gun out of its hiding place, Siam narrowed his eyes slightly. Until now, he'd been a lone soldier, put to use however his employers deemed necessary. He held no tenets, no opinions. He acknowledged that he was an instrument of war. He acknowledged that this was an age where such instruments were necessary. How many battlefields had he passed through? He could see no value in trying to sum up such experience with some complex, ever-shifting philosophy. There were those who would wage war, those who would try to end it, and tools were necessary for both of those ends. That was all the justification a soldier required. Warriors fought, and then they died. There was no room for anything resembling a normal life. That's who they were. Demons, not men. To Siam, to this mercenary, this was a simple fact. His watch showed 6 minutes had passed. 24 minutes to go. By then, they would all know if they had failed or succeeded. It was too long, and yet too short. A gulf of time for him to fill with his own rustling memories. He had been born into an age of enduring conflict. 1948, the First Arab-Israeli War, which started with the declaration of the establishment of the State of Israel. Over 800,000 displaced Arab refugees. A conflict between those who had formed their own nation at the end of their wandering, and those who would now never be able to return to those lands. 1956, the tripartite aggression over the Suez Canal. Any attempts at negotiation or diplomacy were ineffective. The Middle Eastern hegemony shifted into the hands of two nations, further deepening the turmoil. And then 1964, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was formed to retake its founder's rightful homeland, his homeland. 4 years prior, he'd been born into a region west of the Jordan River. Like the other young men of faith who'd thrown themselves into the liberation movement, he too had chosen a path of belief. His beliefs were too rigid, too severe. He did not know or value compromise. He learned to focus on what he could accomplish as a soldier, and strove to become one of the elite in order to end the fighting as soon as possible. He believed that this was the very best that he could do. The organization he joined in his teens was small, but it affiliated itself with the PLO, and then joined up with Colonel Gaddafi's camp, which had provided its members the necessary soldier's education. Infighting, however, gradually reduced the organization's numbers. He used the '82 Lebanon War as his opportunity to temporarily distance himself from the PLO, and had thrown himself instead into the fighting in Afghanistan. That was when he'd acquired the name Siam. He'd acted as a military instructor for the Islamic volunteer soldiers from Thailand. His students had bestowed him the former name of their kingdom. A new name. And when he accepted this new moniker, something that represented something other than himself, he had ceased to be the young man who sacrificed himself for his ideals. At the request of some of his former acquaintances, he returned to the PLO in 1990. Yet again, infighting had brought the organization to the brink of collapse, and he'd been tasked with helping to restructure it. It was around then that he'd reached his current standing. The sub-organization that he belonged to was in dire financial straits. So to keep it solvent, its members had begun taking on mercenary contracts for covert ops from the PLO and Islamic extremist groups that were former affiliates. He'd been a soldier for over 30 years. Through all that time, he'd fought and he had survived. Fighting had honed him on every level. Much of it had been purely mercenary, to secure funding to keep his organization afloat. But he recognized that as being meaningful in its own way. In order to tip the balance in the fighting within their own country, his compatriots needed to encourage other nations to go for each other's throats. Accepting this as the evil that it was, they continued to wield the hammer of justice. Eventually, he'd seen so much that he no longer felt the evil. And then he no longer even felt the justice. Ever the consummate soldier, he was too grounded in harsh reality to deceive himself with flowery words or abstract ideas. everything that he truly understood, he'd come to realize while on the battlefield. And one thing had become completely clear. The fighting that raged through his homeland would not end during the lifetime of his generation. His own existence was nothing more than a blip on the battle radar, a tiny detail in the midst of something vastly larger than himself. Bit by bit, his once rigid faith gave way to something more nihilistic. Times changed, and so did values. At some point, the human heart went on to change as well. His changed convictions left him alienated, and he reformed himself into a solitary soldier. He longed for battle, yet felt no commitment to any particular conflict. And so, despite his legendary record in uniform, he became a mercenary, outside the military establishment. His compatriots began to view him as nothing but a warmonger who fought without beliefs. And they were not so far from wrong. No longer a true partisan of any cause, what he was much harder to define. Ultimately, he was a jack of all trades. Recruit training, guarding VIPs, intelligence operations, subversive activities. He tackled them all. One thing led to another until he arrived at the last major job he'd undertaken as a soldier. The theater was the Iraq War. It was a battle on the fringes, unrelated to the main conflict itself. And there I'd found a girl who had lost everything. Her kin and community all victims of collateral damage. The tragedy that stuck her had unfolded in a single day. When Siam found her, a chance discovery as he was making his way through the area, it was a miracle that she was even breathing. According to the reports, the entire population of the village had been annihilated. Friend or foe, there were no possible survivors. And yet Siam had found one. He'd taken on this war, and that included aiding any civilians once the fighting was over. Even if he knew it was someone unlikely to last much longer than another day. And yet, in defiance of his expectations, I clung desperately to life. I pulled myself back from the brink of death, pieced my broken psyche back together, and declared that I wanted to live. Easier said than done. I had no relatives, and all records of my family had been wiped out. In order for me to live, I would need to be reborn as a soldier.
There probably isn't anyone around with the patience to train a complete novice. I wasn't qualified, but I wound up sticking with you.
Perhaps because something fascinated him about this new responsibility. He took on the task. To say that I wasn't soldier material would have been an understatement. On a scale of 1 to 10, I was less than a 0. My personality was an issue. I was whimsical, unable to keep my emotions in check, and incapable of working as a part of a cohesive unit. My general knowledge and awareness of local customs were also sadly lacking. I couldn't read or write. There was something fundamentally broken about how I processed information. I called the sun blue. At first, Siam figured that I'd simply been taught the word blue to refer what most people acknowledge as yellow. It wasn't long before he was disabused of this notion. I wasn't wrong. Everyone else was. The things I said weren't untrue, from my perspective. The sun did look blue. I was still able to distinguish the color yellow from the color blue, same as anyone else. But I had a very peculiar condition, very rare but unknown to humankind for centuries. Synesthesia. I was just like anyone else, except in how I perceived the world. Words would come to me as shapes, sounds as smells, moods as colors. And it isolated me within my own village, and thereby saved my life. The isolation was also why I had no initial aptitude for soldiering. I struggled to work within an organization as those around me struggled to understand how I operated in a group environment. Siam had no doubt I was the only soldier he'd ever trained who could make eye contact with another person and instantly understand where they fell short. Running me in a standard squad was almost impossibly difficult. Siam soon found that he often needed to give his new novice his undivided attention.
You still afraid of gun?
Attempts to train reactions and physical skills. There was nothing more that he could teach me. I'd mastered shooting and all the fundamentals of his standard physical training. And yet, I was still an astonishingly timid girl. Afraid of the battlefield, afraid of guns, afraid of the trigger. I even seemed afraid of loading a magazine. Every day, Siam found himself thinking, she wasn't cut out for this. But every day, I threw myself back into the training, facing all of the things I feared. Revenge, he began to suspect. No doubt I wanted the ability to fight so that I could strike back at the nameless bunch who had taken my village and my family away from me. She wants to be like me, Siam thought. She wanted to kill. No. I wanted the strength to be able to kill, and then immediately to put that killing to use.
You don't have to be afraid of guns, you know. You fear death because you've known safety. Leave the fear behind. You need to conquer your past, but you also can't forget that safety does exist in this world.
I was still a respectable human being, not a soldier. He and I were cut from different cloth. Realizing that made him wonder if there's anything he could truly teach me.
Sharpshooting is all about fundamentals.
He said.
Fire only at targets within range. Fire from cover. Fire first. That's it. Easy to remember, but hard to pull off. Make it your own. Oh, one other thing. If you do get into a gunfight, make sure the other guy never gets back up again.
I wanted it. That much was clear. And while I might never make much of a rank-and-file soldier, there were better things for me to do than learn regulations and squad tactics. I could survive best on my own. Away from the conventional battlefield, I began to achieve startling results on extreme solo missions. The more skilled my opponent, the more I rose to the challenge. I was a natural-born duelist. No, that wasn't quite right. I was an assassin. Sam had to admit that I'd improved each and every day. The almost daily change of pace was good for him too, as a teacher. The only problem was the source of my motivation.
You're still thinking about revenge, aren't you?
I fell into my typical sullen silence, a scolded child unwilling to tell a lie. Siam acknowledged his misstep in judgment. I might have the makings of the perfect assassin. The assassin's life would never be a good fit for me.
Good.
He said.
Hold on to your vengeance. Repay the insult to your people. But don't stop there. You're capable of much, much more. Don't become a machine stuck repeating the same motions. Take the easy way out. Give yourself over to hatred, and you'll die inside.
Maybe there were no more physical skills to teach me. But he still needed to give me the mental training a warrior required to survive.
Remember this, Kanan. Hatred for its own sake is meaningless. If your hatred isn't tempered by a sense of duty, you will be lost.
That lesson, more an admonishment, was the one thing he'd held on to in the wake of his own disillusionment. His heart bore scars that would never heal. Revenge was a prize without reward. Claiming it could break you if your heart was made of anything less than steel. And so he told me to harden my heart into something that could not be broken. He only hoped it was enough. Even steel wore away over time, bit by bit. A year had passed since then. A year that felt like a day. Now one thing in particular rose in his mind. Before this job, or perhaps the first time ever, I had asked for something. I wanted a tattoo just like his. He'd had no choice but to agree. There had still been one day to go before the job, so we'd gotten it done on location before boarding the train. The tattoo, a snake, represented bad luck and loneliness to the locals. I didn't care. I saw it in a kindred spirit. A creature driven by the same nothingness that fueled myself and Siam. The timid girl and the black snake. If he gave himself over to sentiment, he might have said that the black snake looked somewhat uncomfortable there, coiled on this arm of the girl bent on survival. Sadaqah and I slithered silently along the underside of the train, suspended just above the ties hurtling past beneath us. The slightest mistake in whoever made it would be instantly reduced to an unrecognizable smear of memory.
Hey,
Sadaqah hissed.
pick up the pace.
She was taking point, and I silently complied. I concealed my foul mood, but not so well that Sadaqah couldn't see it. Clearly, she didn't like our chosen route.
Would you have preferred the roof?
Sadaqah asked. I rolled my eyes. The roof is death. But you did lie. This is no circus. Sadaqah let out an appreciative chuckle. Had the little princess been expecting some more elegant means of reaching their target?
If this doesn't suit you, I guess you'll just have to play King Kong next. You like the Empire State Building, yeah?
I don't know what you're talking about, I said. But you're making fun of me, aren't you?
Of course. Shooting the breeze like this is so delightful. Normal small talk is just a bother, but when you can mouth off in a situation like this, you'll never be bored.
I furrowed my brow. Might not ever find it in myself to like Sadaqah, but it did seem like we shared a very quirky sense of humor. The doors to the freight car were shut with combination locks. It seemed like an outdated technology for protecting the classified material the cargo was carrying. Evidently, the enemy had been forced to make use of what they had available. Sadaqah quickly punched in a numerical sequence, and the lock opened. She'd acquired the code sequence before arriving on the train. Due diligence for a code breaker.
What? That's their security?
Sadaqah said as we stepped into the car.
I was expecting a crowd inside. Either they're really confident or complete idiots.
The break-in had been disappointingly easy. We'd surveyed the freight car's interior, still anticipating a further challenge. The space was divided into two compartments. One was sealed and held the item we were after, while the other, in which we now stood, housed a console room for managing the first.
Can you see through the observation window?
Sadaqah said.
That's what we're after, in that case there. The object itself is small. It was made at Fort Detrick. Apparently Moss had struck a secret deal with a U.S. biological warfare experimentation unit deployed in Iraq and got them to hand it over to the Israelis. Based on what I was told, it'll be in something the size of a briefcase.
I mused. So we just bust the door down and smash open the case?
I was advised not to break anything. So we go in like we belong here, open the case, and get out before anyone's the wiser. You just sit tight. Your part of the job assumed there'd be guards. The rest of this is my area of expertise.
You can work at that console?
I brought my own, but what a mess.
Sadaqah rolled at the slapdash array of electronics.
Talk about a headache. Look at all these exposed cables. Is this someone's idea of a joke? I was looking forward to a challenge, but this is low-budget internet cafe level.
Sadaqah grumbled as she hooked up her laptop. The security here was laughable, even considering how much of a rush the enemy had been in to arrange this weapon transfer. Looks like she'd need to do a little more than input the password the Sheik had given her into the terminal.
It's like they're not worried about counterintelligence at all. Are the Israelis seriously this lax? You know, Israeli IT engineers are supposed to be better than this. How could this level of idiot strike a deal with the US military? Or are both sides this dim-witted?
Come now, I murmured. You like the Pentanom M, don't you?
How could I not? Israeli engineers are the coolest.
Huh, I found. Might be loath to admit it, but our opinions were very similar. The PC booted up. Sadaqah logged into the terminal and entered the password. She worked with a skill and alacrity that would have made any codebreaker proud.
By the time you get over to the hacking stage, the job is practically over.
She said.
The days of having to decrypt things on-site are largely in the past. Quite frankly, there's no better way to break through security than social hacking.
Social hacking? I asked. What's that?
It's sort of like detective work. Getting information in ways other than relying on computer know-how and programming techniques. Nobody knows more about the security of a site than the people responsible for it. So you negotiate with them, run surveillance on them, even root through their trash.
Sadaqah explained.
There were only 3 people involved with security on this job, so it was a breeze. Normally, for something with this level of secrecy, I'd need keys from 10 or more people. And hey, let me have one of those sugar things. I need something to put in my mouth.
I frowned, but handed her a sugar stick. So then, why do they call you the code breaker? I asked. Aren't you basically just an on-site troubleshooter like me?
What are you talking about?
Sadaqah asked.
My point is simply that people are easier to hack.
She continued working at the keyboard.
Ideally, that'd be how you get all of what you need, but that's not doable in practice. Besides, social hacking is all about plugging in numbers, too. You're just wasting your time researching someone's emotions, personality, and history if you don't find a way to turn the results into numerical form. When you're done, you arrange the info you've gotten, and the way to derive, say, a password becomes self-evident.
She'd unlocked the 3rd layer of security as she spoke. There was the access password, an infrared scanner lock, and then a lock linked up to the wheels of the train that prevented the compartment door from being opened while the train was in motion.
All right, that's done.
She said.
See, the thing we're after is still a prototype, so I can log in under one of the researchers' names. Then I can use the research lead's account to give me admin rights and... What the...
Is something the matter? I asked.
I've changed the passcode. I tried the 3 highest priority ones I had, but none of them worked.
What does this mean here? 1 hour remaining? I asked.
It means passcode input has been locked out for another hour. Even if any of the other passwords I have are valid, the system won't even let me enter them anymore.
We were running out of time. Already 15 minutes had passed since we'd begun the operation, allowing for 5 minutes to get back to Siam's car. We only had 10 or so minutes left to work.
I up and changed the codes before loading, damn it. Should have known they'd mess up their update schedule along with everything else. Classic.
Is there anything else we can try?
Maybe.
Sadaqah said.
Since we can't get access with the passcode, we could try sending the unlock sequence directly to the lock itself. No, that's impossible. The sequence itself is encrypted and stored in a program, so there's no way for us to get it.
I murmured. Can you open the program itself?
I can, but there wouldn't be any point.
Humor me, I'm curious. Switch places with me real quick.
Don't you get it? You can't get the sequence from the string of numbers in there. Well, we could if we had the time, but that'd be days of work and...
be the sequence here, I said. 189AC4555893E5AE888 312B C367AB29. Give that a try.
The hell?
Did that work? If it did, I get to have what's inside. Sadaqah swallowed wordlessly. She should have been happy. The first stage of her job was finished, after all. Still.
Synesthesia,
She said.
I read about it in the report. Is that how you did that just now?
It's just a different way of understanding things. I can see what colors the numbers and letters are.
That's your explanation? You just see things differently. You're telling me that you intuited that code just by seeing how all the numbers looked?
Synesthesia. A curious condition found in people all over the world to varying degrees. It was defined as the tendency to experience the stimulation of one's sense with additional perceptions in one or more other senses. Human beings have 5 senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell. People who possess 2 or more of these individual senses simultaneously are known as synesthetes. Letters could have colors. Sounds might have shapes. A word might taste sweet or sour. There are many variations, each a unique way to perceive the world. The condition was not generally an impairment. The letter's color could have real meaning. There was a reason that each sound had its peculiar shape. Synesthetes picked up on this additional sensory information not intellectually, but intuitively. It went beyond vision and hearing, simply worked as a combined sense. It created a new form of perception in its own right. The senses themselves didn't literally fuse into one, of course. For a synesthete, the 5 senses could complete each other reciprocally. For instance, visual information might also be processed as sound, and then combined with direct auditory input. Visual cues that were also seen through the other senses could radically increase the seer's ability to comprehend what they were perceiving. The typical image on a page serves as a good example. The ordinary person perceives such an image solely through the sense of sight. A single input, a single level of perception. A synesthete, however, might perceive the same image with 1 or more additional senses as well. Information obtained this way is analyzed by the brain, the secondary perceptions complementing and deepening the information provided by the primary source. The human brain, however, cannot fully grasp such perceptions on a logical level. In the end, the beneficiary of such experiences simply knows what has been perceived without knowing the reason why. It is akin to the experiences of a newborn child. The child has not yet learned language, so it struggles to grasp its mother's intent when she speaks. An entity without intellect asserts all of its physical self into learning, to learn of its surrounding. The nascent brain has not yet separated the language cortex and the visual cortex. In an infant, both function as the same thing. Once those features do become separate, knowledge, as we know it, first comes to play. The organization of knowledge in different regions of the cerebral cortex efficiently reduces certain burdens on the brain, but at the cost of reducing sensory acuity. Seeing the big picture, understanding the details simply by feeling. Not following an ordered thought process, but arriving at the conclusion in a single step. Such possibilities might include picking out the meaning of a sequence of digits that appears meaningless at first glance. For one who did not know intellectually what part of a tree was the leaves and what part was the trunk, it would still be possible to tell them apart based on their different colors, their different shapes. The simplification of things, the condensation of stories.
instinctually understanding solutions without having to follow some process of derivation. This was how a synesthete like me perceives the world.
So even if you don't know what some code or message is trying to express, the colors or shapes will let you interpret it anyway?
Sadaqah asked. Yeah. Like how when you look at a whole sentence, you can sort of tell which parts are important and which parts aren't. If the text as a whole contains some story, the programmer's intent was there in the cipher. I could pick up on one of those colors and flavors, feel the touch of that meaning on my skin. Because of my very nature, I could look at a sentence of a sequence of unknown information and immediately sense which parts are important. I learned to accept that I couldn't understand the why behind it. I've only been able to do this since about 2 years ago, though, I said. Before that, I could only feel things in my skin. But now I could do the same with sounds and smells, which lets me see better than before.
Well, they say synesthesia is something you're born with.
Sadaqah said.
So did some kind of accident or treatment make yours stronger? You know, such as...
My faculties hadn't improved through random happenstance. Perhaps when I was on the brink of death, some of my bodily functions had broken in order to keep me alive, and had somehow changed while I recovered.
They say creatures with unusual tactile acuity pick up information on their surroundings through waves. Are your perceptions something like that?
Sort of. Maybe? I'm not really sure. But I can see my surroundings almost as if they're made of waves when I want to.
So then, can you tell me what I'm doing now?
Sadaqah asked. Yeah, I can see the scent of you shrugging your shoulders.
I can see the scent.
Sadaqah thought.
So that's what using your whole body to perceive things is like.
I had eyes pointing in every direction. I was a veritable sensory prodigy. I had no blind spots. My ears and nose, my tactile sensations, saw on every side at once.
That's quite a gift you have.
Sadaqah said.
Like a sixth sense, the rest of us lost somewhere along the way in exchange for intellect.
Maybe it wasn't so remarkable after all. It was something all human creatures had once possessed, an early gift taken away from them by the serpent of primal knowledge. Progress, not regression, had cost mankind this capability. Sometimes true evolution necessitated the loss of some superior power in order for a species to thrive. Humans had grown more complex through language, culture, and thought, the only creatures on Earth to distance themselves from their animal nature. And what was it we'd lost? The trick of knowing only answers at a look. To receive an answer without thinking, that was nothing more than the abandonment of thought.
You're a primitive, basically.
Sadaqah smirked inwardly at the thought. This girl was such a simple creature. No wonder Siam's edge had been dulled from having to deal with this.
Sadaqah, status?
The sudden sound of the radio snapped her back to attention. We had under 5 minutes left to go.
No problems. Things went a little bit awry, but the young lady here managed to resolve it.
Roger that. Try to hurry. The guards have started harassing passengers here. Something about a spy. We've got 2 minutes, tops.
Same as ever, then.
Sadaqah replied.
We'll be back before the firing squad lines up.
I stared at the briefcase-like container in the open compartment. Really is portable, then. I think that's you.
It really is portable, then. I've already confirmed the contents via the terminal. I know it's unwieldy, but would you mind carrying that case, young lady? And whatever you do, do not open it. No matter what. One misstep and every living thing around for miles dies.
Wait, what? I said.
Siam,
She radioed.
I forgot to ask. What are we acquiring here?
One of the smallest, most sinister weapons in the world.
There was a brief silence, but I already knew what his words implied. A chill ran up my spine. I could feel the latent threat before me now. Siam, this is...
Virus. Designated Risk Group 4 by the American CDC. Their highest risk rating. Secret experiments were carried out to disseminate and infect people with it in order to demonstrate its lethality. Then its genetic code was tweaked to increase its efficacy as a bioweapon. They call it UA Proto.
That was it. That's what the name of the fragment of hell that had brought ruin to my life 2 years ago earlier. Ua. A microscopic demon released by mankind. It was the year 2000. A retrovirus awoke in the Drakensberg region of South Africa. Deforestation carried out in the name of advancing national development unleashed the pathogen upon the land, rapidly infecting a local village. The virus's combination of high lethality rate and a high infection rate wiped out the entire village in a matter of days. The South African government carried out radical sterilization procedures, burning down the forests in several kilometer radius. Luckily, the virus was still vulnerable, and the sterilization effort proved successful. Until 3 years later.
The agents from another nation collected samples of the virus from the same woodlands and began to research on military application. They improved the virus and successfully created a weaponized prototype, the Demon of Rogue. They chose a village already engulfed in the flames of war as a test site. Under cover of the conflict in Iraq, the weapon makers carried out their experiment. The virus was unleashed and the village vanished. The lethality rate was over 90%. The infection rate and survivability of the pathogen both exceptionally high. This was the tiny demon, invisible to the naked eye, that had taken everything from the young girl called Kanan. After that, there were rumors of further development. The improved form of the virus was given the name UA, and the last of the prototype that had destroyed that nameless Middle Eastern village was frozen. Yes, frozen. Not disposed of, not eradicated. The weapon was difficult to use, but those who possessed it still felt that there was value, even in the inferior prototype. Furthermore, it represented a great deal of research money, which meant, whoever it might be, should a buyer emerge, they would sell. I had no words. Why was this thing here, now? I felt nothing. No grief, rage, or despair. I simply thought calmly. Someone is still alive who's willing to use this weapon. That includes the soldiers who are here to protect it.
Hey, young lady.
I know. Right now we need to get this case to Siam. I spoke. I moved mechanically, removing the case from its compartment. Whatever free will I'd possessed a moment before had vanished. Sadaqah watched me, satisfied. Then, both of us stiffened with alarm. A message appeared on the monitor.
Panda.
Gaze connection broken. Security breach possible. If this connection is unresolved after 60 seconds, alert broadcast will commence.
You didn't disable the alarms? I snarled.
Complain later. We'll never get it reconnected in time. Call Siam, now.
The call was brief, and the conclusion was clear. The parameters of the job had changed. The fight was unavoidable. We would need to strike first. Siam,
Just listen. I'll neutralize the guards in the rear car. While I do, keep pressure on the ones up front. Once I've secured the rear, I'll give you the signal to fall back.
For the time being, Sadaqah and I were trapped. There were 7 hostiles ahead of us and 7 more behind. All we could do now was set up in the freight car to buy ourselves time. And yet, I think this calls for a more aggressive solution.
Attendant, wait!
I cut the connection. My eyes gleamed with menace. This was no time for hesitation. This was time for battle.
You? Alone?
Sadaqah was incredulous.
Are you out of your mind? Having confidence in your skills is one thing. Be realistic. There are 7 soldiers out there.
I know that. But these guys aren't as good as Siam. I was all action. There was no room for emotion. I'd analyzed my problem, and now I was going to solve it.
I can't have you dying on me.
Sadaqah said.
You're a very valuable asset to this organization and... Oh, never mind.
It was clear that conversation wasn't going to be a thing right now. The gleam in my eyes was that of a beast of the hunt. Give me the case. I'll get it to Siam.
Sadaqah.
Give me the case. I'll get it to Siam. I'm used to working with him. If we can catch the guards in a pincer attack, we can end this quickly. No, I'm...
Near as I could see, Sadaqah's words didn't have the color of a lie. She was a code breaker, forced by the situation to fight. Alright, I said. Try not to drop it. Just be careful not to get in Siam's way.
Same goes for you. Don't try to prove anything out there. If things get dicey, get out.
I could smell the sound of the wheels and the color of the wind were now both rigidly. Honestly, I muttered to myself. If he was gonna come to this, what did we even need her for anyway? Sadaqah's color bothered me far more than that it
Right then.
Siam murmured. The car devolved into chaos. Guards barked out orders forbidding anyone to leave their seats. They brandished their guns as they interrogated one traveler after another. The passengers were quaking. While the train was passing through a country, the local government held police authority on board. The soldiers believing the passengers were Jordanian. Siam could tell, having come aboard during the freight car rearrangement. He counted them among the 14 hostiles. It was only a matter of time before they realized that Sadaqah and I were no longer in our seats.
Yes, it's time to get started.
Siam let out a sigh of resignation.
Hey, you there! Back in your seat!
Now, things were getting interesting. Sam walked wordlessly toward the front of the train. It was clear that wherever he went, death would follow. The other passengers scrambled toward the back of the car. No chance for another surprise attack this time. These soldiers were already ready for combat. They pulled the trigger as soon as they had a target. It was 1 against 6 now. If we played this by a book, Sam wouldn't stand a chance. Rule 1 was always shoot from cover. It was the first lesson he taught his students. They was
Rules were made to be broken.
so much for playing it by the book. Fastening the top button of his custom bulletproof coat, he strode forward.
I am a wall. Walls feel no pain.
He opened the door. Bullets ricocheted all around him. He cased his enemies, assessed their firepower. He might get injured, but he was confident he would have done it. Right now, there were only 2 guards in the dining car. Time to get
Barging in on dinner like this. Where are my manners?
His innards were hurting, his bones creaked, but he fought to keep his aim steady. He had some internal bleeding, but nothing he couldn't help.
Sorry. Never was housebroken.
He took another step forward. Reckless, maybe, but if he didn't deal with these before reinforcements came, well, no point worrying about that now. Not when there were people left. And just like that, he was down to 3. The worst was yet to come, and his body would bear the brunt of it. Still, Siam was unafraid. He was dead from the beginning. He walked forward. He traded his courage, his passion, for an emptiness without fear. My heart beat in time with wearing it. But my mind was clear. Mechanical coolness. I considered my orders and the time I had available to carry them out. I inferred the positions of my 7 targets, assessed the potential for a strategy that could overcome some orders, and picked my target. I did think this by instinct. I didn't need to think. I let the hard soles of my shoes slap down on the roof of the truck. That should get your attention.
Panda.
Up top!
Emilio.
They're headed for the engine. Cut them off.
The soldiers sprang into action. One of the gangway doors opened as the leading guard stepped through. A red-clad figure flashed into view and moved through the adjacent car. My hair streaming in the wind as the train raced along at 80 kilometers per hour. I fired twice. My turret failure was just a matter of time. I didn't have the firepower to go up against 5 well-armed opponents head-on. At the moment, we were on equal footing, both sides powering under cover. I'd never be able to pick them off. Sooner or later, the soldiers would realize that they could lay down enough suppressive fire to force her to stay down while someone rushed her position. If I tried to rush them instead, the instant I emerged from behind my seat, I'd fall victim to a hail of bullets. I slowed. For the moment, it was astounding. I couldn't see the enemy, and they couldn't see me. Then, I heard one of the soldiers.
No capture necessary. Just eliminate. Cover me.
Guards were using hand signals, but I could perceive them as allies. There. The vibration of the guards' movements, the sound of breathing, the scent of gunpowder. That was enough. They weren't on equal footing anymore. My 5 heightened senses melded into a single potent awareness. The enemy was on my turf. The angle of the floor and the walls, the strength of the position of the wooden seats, the humidity, the air, subtle cues of function and impact. There was nothing I could not detect. My synesthetic perception precisely matched the interior of the car as I removed, showing me everything in my need to know. There was no vague impression or rough calculation. I had an innate grasp of the exact spatial relationship of everything on this limited battlefield. Now all I had to do was wait for the approaching enemy soldier to reveal the last bit of information I needed.
Men down. Emilio.
How the hell is she shooting from there?
I could feel the guard's confusion. My snapshot shouldn't have landed. Yet it caught between the advancing soldier right between his eyes. The survivors were breathing rapidly now, and their lungs betrayed their alarm. The unexpected counterattack brought bewilderment, and then a rush of fear. Still, I knew that if I simply tried the brute force approach and charged the enemy position, I'd only provoke them into bringing their full firepower to bear. That would limit my options. I needed to modify the parameters of the fight first. I was outgunned. I wasn't going to be able to change that. Might be able to drop one more of them with another quick shot, but I'd only wind up getting overrun. And one option left. I should abandon cover. Go for life. I needed to drop 4 targets in the span of a single breath, like the duck.
And
Ha! Had that rascal mark been hers or the enemy's? The guard's leader put me neck in my forehead, with his finger on the trigger. I picked up the dead man's gun. Not for ammo. To carry out the plan I'd envisioned. I knew I needed something more than my Beretta.
Emilio.
What are you doing? Shoot her!
Leader of the guards. The subsequent barrage was too uncontrolled to be called suppressive fire. The 4 men fired wildly, trying in vain to follow my nigh inhumane plan. I sped away. I could read the ripples of the air, could even predict the movements of the soldiers' muzzles, the angle of their gun barrels, the trajectories of their shots. But I knew I couldn't hope to dodge every bullet. But before the slow was struck, I dived out the door. Whew. I let out a soft sigh as my combined senses became distinct once more. I need to neutralize 4 targets in the span of a single breath. That was precisely what I'd done. See? Look at that, I said. Now that's what I call a circus. I landed with a flourish back inside the train car. cleared out all the soldiers stationed in the forward compartment. I had successfully recovered the payload and wiped out the enemy force. Now my task was to evacuate ASAP. I wanted to check in with Siam, but knew I shouldn't risk breaking radio silence without knowing the situation on his end. He probably doesn't need me to bail him out anyway. I wanted to rush to him, but knew Siam would be disappointed in me if I did. Now that I'd made it forward to the secured freight compartment, doubling back to a rear of the train only to have come forward again would be a waste of time. Maybe I should head for the engine and stop the train. With our cover blown, we certainly couldn't go too long. Siam and I would need to get off the train en route and conceal our whereabouts. Probably the sooner the better. Huh? The scent shifted. I heard sharp footsteps. I spun around, ready to fire. There was rustling of clothes and a new sensation crashed against my skin. Sadaqah's arrival had helped put an end to the gunfight in the rear troop compartment. She caught two of the guards in a pincer attack, and before the last enemy had a chance to regroup, Sam had managed to gun him down.
Reckless as ever, Siam. You know, at your age, you really need to stop letting yourself get shot.
Sadaqah strolled over to him. Only after confirming that all the guards had been neutralized did Sam finally let his mindset shift from combat readiness to simple high alert.
I only did as much as was necessary.
He said,
I knew you'd show up. Wanted to give them an obvious target so they'd leave their rear exposed.
the tension between them eased. It had been years since they'd been alone in the same room together.
Still, that strategy isn't like you.
Sadaqah said.
Why didn't you fall back to the next car? That's what you should have done. A tactical retreat. Keep them disrupted but on the move.
Siam considered. Maybe it really had been necessary to make this car into the battleground. If it had accomplished one thing, it was allowing the fleeing passengers a chance to make it to safety.
Don't tell me you've finally grown a conscience.
Sadaqah said, as if she'd read his mind.
I'm just thinking about how our employer, with our cover blown, the enemy might have been able to ID us. I had to do what I could to make sure you guys wouldn't get a bad reputation with the Liberation Front.
If you say so.
Sadaqah said.
So, this was all over the UA, which means this little spate of bloodshed is on the Israelis for trying to get their hands on some weaponized virus. And we're just meting out punishment to the thieves. I suppose that's a good thing, if you say so. But it leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
How so?
Neither of us like wasted effort. And look at all the trouble I've put you through. All right, Siam. I'm going to tell you two things. First, I'm going to be taking this case. Second, I'm not going to leave anyone alive to know about it. No witnesses, including you.
Gunfire and screams echoed from the back of the train. Someone was mercilessly gunning down the passengers who'd fled there for safety.
The Liberation Front only sent 2 covert operatives. I brought more. That's who you're hearing going to work back there. And after you risked yourself to protect those people too.
You're betraying the front.
Siam rasped.
It's not betrayal. The Liberation Front was simply a patron to me. I was just doing a Sadaqah. Really. Well, now the fundamentalists have been beaten at their own armed conflict game. I'd say it's high time we cut ties.
The slaughter continued. Several passengers who hadn't managed to flee to the rear of the train still cowered, trembling in the car where Siam had battled the soldiers. A survival that would make an ironic turn when the butchers doing their work farther down the train reached this car.
This doesn't make sense.
Siam said.
If the Liberation Front gets this bioweapon, they'll become the danger that you've always wanted them to be.
Indeed. If I hand this over to the Palestinians, the Israelis won't be able to stand by quietly. But your side is outgunned, and ultimately you'd be forced to break the seal on this thing to even up the odds. And I can't have that. After all, I'm the one who prompted the US military to sell it off in the first place.
Siam let out a hoarse gasp.
What I want is rumors.
Sadaqah continued.
Dangerous rumors. A biological weapon the US military was getting rid of, stolen mid-transport in a raid in Jordanian territory. Was the transport arranged by Israeli hardliners? Was the raid carried out by the PLO? Who got their hands on the virus? No one will be sure of the truth. Tensions will rise. That's all I'm after. War is never good. A toy like this needs to be reserved for those who know how to use it properly.
This was all political farce, and an especially poor one at that. Neither the side transporting the weapon nor the side attempting to steal it would know where it had gone. Suspicion would beget suspicion, plunging the Middle East further into chaos.
Do the Israelis not know about this?
Siam asked.
Was the UA prototype deal some hardliners working independently?
That's right. The desperate flailing of some old fools who are backed into a corner. Their leaders must be in a mad rush right now, knowing that their own people have been trying to bring some lethal poison into their house without consulting them. Of course, for them, all this was for the good of Israel. What was that you always said? Faith can be a real nuisance.
Siam felt a dark cloud pass behind his eyes. This operation had been doomed to failure from the start. The Liberation Front had been played like an owl. Key people had been handed information they wanted, like they wanted it. After that, greed and anticipation had ensured that they'd acted properly. Seeking only chaos and confusion, the instigator had used one of the oldest tricks in the book.
And so we die. And the Liberation Front fails to acquire the weapon. Is that the idea?
Siam said.
There's no need for this. You want to fan the flames of confrontation. Even without a third party pouring on more gas, the fires here aren't going to go out.
You're right. Accomplishing that much wouldn't require my direct intervention. But I have other reasons for getting personally involved in this case. Getting control of UA, and getting rid of you. Our fates are connected, Siam. You blame yourself for not stopping the UA experiment 2 years ago. I knew you'd take the bait this time if you knew the virus was involved. And if anyone was going to be able to get rid of you, it was going to be me, right? Though I must admit, You're stupider than I gave you credit for.
So this is all just a scheme to protect your secrets.
Siam said.
And I'm an obstacle to concealing the existence of a weaponized UA.
Yes. Though I didn't decide that just now. I'd been thinking about getting rid of you since the very beginning.
Very beginning. I only learned about UA 2 years ago. We've known each other for 4.
True. But you know too much about me. Not my birthplace, I don't care about that. You know what kind of soldier I am.
Siam stared at Sadaqah through a haze of pain. Any secret weapon becomes less effective once its true capabilities are known. And she sees herself as a weapon. She'll kill me to maintain her effectiveness.
Sounds like I underestimated your need for privacy. So once you're done with me, Kanan's next.
She is. I know that she's an UA survivor. She poses the same problem you do. And she survived a viral weapon with a 100% lethality rate. Why and how is she still alive? She'll be able to provide some valuable data.
When she'd first arrived on the train, Sadaqah had said something cryptic about looking into personnel and looking into a flaw with a weapon. Now it was clear that what she meant by that was she wanted to gather information about an UA survivor and how the weapon had affected her. From the start, this job had been about nothing more than getting the most she could out of UA.
So, you want to use the virus, and you wanted to personally examine the one person who survived it.
Siam asked.
Is that really all there is to this?
That's it.
Sadaqah said.
I'd hoped to be able to bring her back as a live specimen, but... oh well. She's a little too exceptional. She would make for a very convenient sample. She's too caught up in hatred, and now she's going to die in vain.
Sadaqah's radio crackled to life.
Panda.
The rear section is now secured.
A masculine voice declared.
Should we prepare to withdraw once we click done cleanup?
Negative. Hold off on that for now. Our people in the forward section are late for the rendezvous. Contact the helicopter and let them know.
The sound of gunfire told of more passengers being cut down.
A helicopter?
Siam croaked.
That's right. This train's going to be derailed. And I sure don't plan on walking home. The Israelis aren't incompetent. I plan on getting out of here as fast as I can.
She'd been very thorough. In all likelihood, she planted explosives further along the track. But much simpler than tampering with the train. The crash might not completely destroy the train, but enough to eliminate any remaining passengers. If the engine wasn't stopped before it was derailed, there would be no hope of saving anyone who remained on the train.
So anyone at all involved with the UA, the people who helped you steal it, even anyone who happened to be on board this train, they're all gonna die. Thorough, if a bit excessive.
Siam said.
But can you actually pull it off?
Don't tell me you're still counting on your little girl.
Sadaqah sneered. It was a crueler, colder expression than any Siam had seen before.
She's of no use to me. I thought she might have some promise at first, but her hatred of the virus has made her lose control of herself. It's compromised her abilities. It's disappointing, really. All of your efforts wasted.
That's where you're wrong.
Siam said. He was dying, but his voice was firm. In the back of his mind, there was a whisper. Sadaqah had sent Soap and Vermin to the engine compartment. Why hadn't they returned?
Just what are you trying to say, Siam?
Nothing special, just the obvious. People who know fear don't act out of hatred. Kanan, she's not like you or me.
The chill between them became acute. She lifted up her gun, taking aim at Siam's forehead. Her expression said it all. This man before her had fallen from grace, and her disappointment had turned deadly.
Let me just make one thing clear. I'm not like you,
She said.
You're right. Because you know what you are.
For one fleeting moment, their old connection was renewed. He spoke. She listened, saying nothing, as she'd often done so long ago.
I've changed my mind.
Sadaqah said.
I think I am going to finish you off.
Didn't you just shoot me in the head to begin with?
Because of the jinx. You've been shot so many times. Yet by some miracle, you've never taken a bullet to the head.
Her voice was hollow, as if she'd already put this all to an end. She raised her gun.
It's not a miracle.
He said.
And not getting shot in the head is just why I'm still alive. You and I were both just ordinary soldiers.
I know that.
Sadaqah replied.
It's just... well... it's just this image I have of you. That's all.
Siam! I came charging from the adjacent car. In the heat of my fury, I fired wildly, but still managed to knock the gun from Sadaqah's hand. Sadaqah instantly retreated. She sensed instinctively to her chagrin that she could not defeat her young rival now. Under the circumstances, this was prey she wasn't ready to hunt. Sadaqah clicked her tongue, dismayed at being outfaced by such an impulsive attack. I'd been so calm and collected before. Somehow I'd been transformed into a creature of pure emotion. A warrior undefeated and clearly beyond Sadaqah's capabilities. The scent shifted. I heard sharp footsteps. I spun around, ready to fire my gun. There was a rustling of clothes and a new sensation crashed against my skin. A volley of bullets whisked right past my head. But how? A chill ran down my spine. There were enemies other than the soldiers on board this train. This one was dressed as a train engineer. Shaking off a premonition of disaster, I pursued this movement as he retreated toward the front of the train. Right now, I needed to stop the engine. I followed the enemy and shot him into the driver's cab. Whoever the fake engineer was, who was defiant to the last, finally collapsed in the word. Looking around the cab, I saw the murdered bodies of the real engineers, as well as the smashed control panel, which was now clearly useless. This guy was wrecking the train. He must not have been in league with the soldiers protecting it. If there was some third party that we hadn't been aware of, I broke into a sprint. If I had a better understanding of how the train functioned, I might have found some way to stop it by force, by destroying something in the engine room. But I had no time to ponder such things out. My instincts spurred me into action. The priorities of the situation had changed. As I raced back toward where I left Simon and Sadaqah, I reflected that I hadn't loved this job from the start. Something about this train just felt wrong. Its mottled colors and voted ill for me. Siam! I ran as fast as I could. The sight of my previous battle and everything beyond leaped to the thick stench of death. The dread of blood and fire was almost overwhelming as I headed into the compartment. All at once, I saw pure, excruciating red. Siam! Violent emotions surged through me as I cut loose with a wild barrage. It was the first time since I'd first picked up a gun that I'd fired without certainty that I'd hit my mark. The bullets found their marks, and several of Sadaqah's men fell dead. But how many moments had this bought Siam? Sadaqah had vanished towards the rear of the train, carrying the case with her. I didn't even consider following her. Instead, dumbstruck, I dropped to my knees beside my mentor. My mind couldn't process the situation. Just like a newly hatched chick, Siam told me with the faintest of smiles. No. I shook my head, not wanting to hear what he would say.
I've taken my death wound. You can see that.
His voice was calm. I stared at him, silently pleading. No. I kept shaking my head slowly, inwardly imploring him not to die, but unable to put my plea into words. Siam stirred. His consciousness was fading from blood loss, but the face before him was one he recognized. He shook himself back to awareness, recalling the young girl he'd found 2 years before. The memory hardly seemed real. Those days of mundane, everyday life hadn't been his to live.
Hon, you need to accept this.
No, I can't. I won't. I knelt, still shaking my head as Siam calmly told me what had happened. Sadaqah had betrayed us. She had stabbed him and stolen the case with the bioweapon. The train would soon be derailed and destroyed. The train crew and passengers had been murdered, though there might still be a few alive. Failed miserably. The situation was only getting worse. Sadaqah was getting away. I don't care about Sadaqah, I wailed. We just need to get you medical attention. If we could just stop the bleeding, we can still...
It'd be a waste of time. There are other things you need to do. Open your eyes, Kanhan. There is nothing special about this. Me and her, we're soldiers. Nothing more. Soldiers toss away their humanity. Soldiers get shot. Did I ever teach you to seek some meaning in that?
No, you're wrong. You're not like her, Siam. I don't know what she's like, and I don't want to know, but you're different. You're a good person. Maybe you could be cold, but you're not a monster like her. He had no response to that. Wasn't he a monster? Well, perhaps not. He'd recovered enough emotion to feel guilt at what she'd said at least. Though, that hardly made him human.
You need to focus, Kanan. Assess the situation. Form a plan of action. Remember, our job is to get that case back, stop this train, and eradicate the UA virus.
It wasn't fair. He knew how to press my button. Eradicate the very words that would transform me from girl to soldier.
Kanan, tell me, what happened at the head of the train?
I took down the guards. The engineer was one of that woman's companions, and he wrecked the control panel. So now we can't use it to stop the train. We'll have to destroy the engine room itself, or maybe use the brakes on each side of the individual cars.
Were there any other survivors?
Nobody out of the secure freight car. The only ones alive are you and me.
Good. I'll stop the train. You go after her. No discussion.
I held my breath. Leaving Sam here, wounded as he was tantamount to letting him die. And why should he worry about stopping the train when we were the only passengers still alive? I couldn't imagine leaving him to spend his final moments alone.
Anna, look around. How many survivors?
His soldier's edge wiped away my sentimentality.
Tell me, Kanan, how many are there?
I lifted my downcast eyes. In all our time together, he never once replied on her exceptional nature. He never shunned me for being different. Always accepted me together with my curse, my gift. Now he needed my help. There are 3, I said, gazing around, reading the colors of the fallen. Only 3 people alive.
Only 3.
Yes, only 3. Amidst the sea of blood that surrounded us, 3 of the passengers still clung to life. Yes, that's right, I said. I doubted they had any chance of survival. Even with medical care, probably none of them would make it. But that wasn't how Sam saw things, or how he wanted me to see it. No. I corrected myself. There are 3 people we can save. At that, he nodded. And maybe, just a little, a smile.
I'll handle the train. I'll undo the couplings so that we're able to apply the brakes. I'm pretty sure I've still got enough strength to pull that off. Your job is going to be a bit more difficult.
I know, but I'll be right back. My voice, my emotions, under control, at last. I was the consummate warrior now, just like he trained me to be.
Kanan, you were victimized. Your past stolen from you by war. She was defeated, her past swallowed up by power struggles beyond her control. Your paths as warriors began in similar places, but you have walked them in different ways.
Sam's gun slid from his hand. It seemed in that moment like a symbol of his life. A hard and deadly weapon, a killer of many, now abandoned.
Soldiers born of destruction make hatred into a weapon.
Sam said.
That's what made her and me so empty inside. The hatred just burns inside until all else has burned out. Do you remember what I told you?
I do. You said that hatred.
Hatred must never be used as a means of fighting back.
Even if the power it gave you let you destroy your opponent, if you cultivated such power, it would destroy you too in the end.
Well done.
He thought. Perhaps he really had managed to pass on all that he could. His lips curled into the ghost of a smile. He once said that death was the great equalizer, that it came the same for everyone no matter who they were. Now Siam's time had come, and I realized with a sudden and surprising calm that I'd accepted it.
My last request.
He said.
Don't let Sadaqah get away. And save whatever lives you can.
Yes. Good fortune to you, Siam. There was no grieving. We simply parted ways, each reflecting on the past 2 years and needing nothing more than that. Sadaqah stood atop the tree. The scenery, a uniform brown for much of the journey, was now dotted with green places. They were drawing close to their destination, the destination she had chosen. Very shortly, the train's usefulness would come to an end. Less than 2 minutes to go before the rendezvous with the Black Hawk. Sadaqah carried the case in her left hand, handcuffed to her wrist, and gripped the gun in her right. The preparations had been flawless. The helicopter pilot was highly skilled. He would lower a ladder to her at her position, and she would simply ride it right on. She'd accomplished most of what she wanted, and now her retreat would be swift. She should have been wholly pleased with the situation, and yet she was wholly dissatisfied. Of course, that would have been the case regardless of the results she would take. It was not in her nature to ever be content. Only by striking out at the world around her could she even keep herself sane. And now, her thirst for vengeance was worse than ever.
And here she comes.
A girlish silhouette appeared on the roof of the train not far away, and Sadaqah felt her thirst change to hunger.
Time to go a-hunting.
She more than had the upper hand. If she were to go down, the case would fall down with her. And if the case were damaged, the Ua virus would very likely be released. Which meant that this little lady couldn't shoot at her until she got the case away. Whereas Sadaqah was free to unload on her as much as she wanted. The kill was certain to be hers. How could she help but smile? She'd stolen the Ua, stirred up both sides of the international conflict, and would soon eliminate the last witness to her scheme. It had been quite some time since she'd last scored such a coup.
I suppose I owe the little lady a little thanks for contributing to my success.
Her target was 3 cars away. Knowing her pistol's effective range, Sadaqah gave herself an 80% chance of hitting. If I had been 1 car closer, it would have been 100%. And since it wasn't like I could fly, she had no hope of escaping a certain death. Sadaqah aimed at the train car's roof just in front of my feet.
Time for a little intimidation. Let's show this upstart what real skill looks like. She needs to understand that a step closer to me is a step into certain death. All right, little lady. Let's see how well you dance.
Sam struggled to his feet. He had a final job to do. There were 6 meters and a door between him and the coupling that linked his car to the next. Easy enough under ordinary circumstances. Once he entered the coupling, the automatic air brake would kick in and stop the rear section of the train. The distance seemed vast. How much time was it going to take him to do something as simple as waking up in the morning and washing his face? It was altogether too long and treacherous a journey. A journey that would use up all that remained of his life.
So they still haven't disappeared on me.
Muddied memories played in his mind like scenes from an old movie.
There was a time when I saw hope in a girl who made nihilism her reason to live. After that, I found hope in another girl's weakness as she clung to her desire to live.
The hope Sadaqah brought had been like opium. A drug he took to coax himself into thinking his actions were for the best. Somehow, at the time, he never realized his mistake. And then there was me, a victim of war. I'd given him a kind of hope that brought all his own pain sharply into focus. Even at death's door, she thought nothing of dying, only wanted to live a life of meaning. He had no doubt now which kind of hope was the better one, but he still remembered both, just as he remembered the faith that had driven him long before he met either girl. It was decades ago now. How naive he had been, an unsophisticated firebrand clinging to blind belief. Three wounded passengers, 3 people to save. The thought drove him on. 2 years earlier, he'd been unable to save anyone. He had been nothing but a killer. Did that make him a hypocrite now? Perhaps, but if so, for once, he could accept his own hypocrisy. Sam blinked. His eyesight was failing. Maybe it was the light of the truth that had blinded him. He was paying at last for the sin of casting aside his beliefs so long ago. Did he have the stamina to keep going? Of course he did. He trained himself to find new reserves of strength when it mattered most. War was always like this. After the mind and body had given out, a true soldier could forge onward on spirit alone, like a servant of the dead. It had been a long time since he'd taken a job that tipped the scales back toward the living. Of course, he'd always told himself that he killed so that he and others might live. Mercy and slaughter stemmed from the same behavioral principle, the struggle for self-preservation. Still, a soldier's deeds seemed to slip inevitably towards the negative end of the spectrum. He remembered how long the slide had started. The motives that had driven him to take up arms pushed him further and further into the void.
I will lose my life now. I will lose this emptiness. At long last, my balance will return to zero.
Another memory. Before they'd boarded the train, I'd begged him for a special boon. Just when had that happened exactly? You're such a liar, Sam. You said it wasn't gonna hurt at all. I had no idea it was gonna be that painful. Perhaps at the time, Sam had simply forgotten how painful it was. He'd been good at that, after all. He asked me if the pain from my new tattoo would impair me for the upcoming job, and I shook my head. I mean, yeah, it does hurt, I said, but it makes me happy, and that makes me better at what I do. My skills really did change based on my emotions. My good moods were rare, but when I was happy, my abilities were remarkable indeed. A tattoo was a small price to pay for. I was quite probably the strangest person he'd ever known. Meeting me was an honor for him, in a way. Even while my training made me into a soldier, I never really let go of my as long as I have it, I'll never forget what you've taught me. Remembering it now, I felt a vague sense of fulfillment. For a monster, you've done a pretty good job. We stood 30 meters apart. I'd stopped my advance just at the edge of the third corner. Sadaqah waited silent. I could never hit her from there. I took one more step. One more and the real fun would start. The curtain had risen on the final edge. The violent drone of the helicopter sounded in the distance. In a matter of moments, the chopper would arrive, lowering the ladder to Sadaqah and then ascend and triumph.
What are you waiting for?
She called out.
Don't tell me you came up here just to watch me go. I thought you were sworn to destroy the virus.
Her challenge was a hiss above me. I glared. I knew I could reach my enemy in 5 seconds or less. But Sadaqah would need only one of those seconds to aim and follow. I would be killed 5 times over if I charged. It was a risk I couldn't afford to take. I couldn't hope to win. Not under these conditions. You really think I'd just let you go? I called back. Don't be a fool. Sadaqah's taunt had stung me. My rival's voice was like a jagged claw, a filthy talon scratching at my temples. I ground my teeth in frustration. I had no fear of charging in without fear. That wasn't going to work this time. I would give too much of an edge to my opponent.
This is such a letdown.
Sadaqah said.
But no matter. Whatever you do, I'll be able to put the contents of this case to good use. Did you know, young lady, that this UA is a flawed weapon? More a negotiation tool than anything I'd actually use. And why is that, you ask? Because it's too powerful.
The ladder swayed down from the helicopter. Sadaqah could make her escape in a moment if she chose. And yet she hesitated. Still not
The fact is, it's too early to use the virus as a weapon.
she said.
It'll take the world's top researchers 2 years at least to fully understand what they're up against. Then, the UA will have some real value in my catalog. A pity you won't be there to see that. Your deaths here are really going to accomplish nothing. But don't worry. I'll make sure the UA reaches its full potential. No one may care that it took your parents from you, but one day this weapon will make a grand name for itself. And then I'm going to make a killing.
I fought back a wave of nausea. Ferocious colors danced before my eyes. Sparkle in one, I said. It's not gonna happen. I was all crying from somewhere. Felt a faint shudder through my feet. The train began to slow. Strength filled my limbs. I I shifted my posture, ready to spring into action.
I guess I didn't need to provoke you.
Sadaqah sniffed. She could see it in my eyes. I was ready to run right to my death. Everything was falling into place. The bleak scenery was opening out into a fertile landscape. I was about to die. One step forward and there would be a resounding gunshot. But instead of moving, I spoke. Your name. What is it really? Sadaqah smiled. So that's what it's been like.
Alfred.
She said.
Siam wanted his promised land, but all he was able to make me into was just another terrorist.
Is that her words? His Sadaqah, Alfred, stared in surprise. This instant that she realized her first shot had missed, she pulled the trigger again. This time, her eyes went wide with shock.
How could I miss at this range?
The red-clad figure sped up along the tree in front of her. Zigzag whizzing like a bolt of light. On she came, he was exactly there. There was no doubt about it. I was dodging bullets. For a master marksman like Alfred, the nightmare come to life.
No, this is ridiculous. It can't be.
What I was doing simply shouldn't be possible. Just before each shot, I would change my trajectory unpredictably, shifting out of the bullet's path. Evasive movement was a standard tactic. Knowing precisely when and where to dodge, that required an inhuman ability to predict the future.
It's like she can practically see the bullets.
That simply wasn't possible, was it? Alfred's mind raced. She fought a rising wind with me.
Actually, Kai, you narrate this section. It seems like it's from Alfred's point of view.
That simply wasn't possible, was it? My mind raced. I fought a rising wave of panic. The girl had almost reached me now. But I still held one advantage. The case in my left hand. The girl would have to go for the case before attacking me directly. I would just have to kill her before that. It was simple. Just pull the trigger. And yet I'd begun to doubt that I could hit Khan. I struggled to comprehend what I was up against. My mind recoiling as I began to understand the full extent of this demon's powers.
You don't really think I can see the bullets, do you?
Her voice was like that of the whispers of the devil himself, speaking what was in my mind. I fixed my opponent with a
I see your hatred.
She could see my emotions. Of course. This girl could discern emotions like they were colors. She wasn't looking at the bullets, or even at my movements. She was reading my expectations. She could tell exactly when I believed that I would hit her mark, my mark. Exactly when I would fire, and that was precisely when she'd dodge aside. So long as a foe had human emotions, this girl could predict what that foe would do an instant before it happened. That was it. This was it. Kanan was all confidence. She was closing in for the kill. Of course. I laughed. The only way to ruin her enemy's predictions was to do something wholly unpredictable.
Huh?
As I hurled the case from the train, Kanan instinctively launched after her.
Huh?
Realizing she'd been baited even as she was tumbling through the air, Kanan clutched the case to her chest and rolled to face her foe, reflectively bringing her gun to bear. Bullets whizzed in both directions. For an instant, the two combatants seemed suspended in a kind of distorted balance. Two natural opposites in opposition. One who could sense emotions, and one who could eliminate them. By all rights, they should have been evenly matched. But Kanan's own emotions tipped the scale in her favor. I'd let myself get too drawn in. So I had forced myself to swallow my hatred for a moment, and fired at the girl as if it was a simple obstacle. I would find a color of determination that Kanan could not see. And yet even those shots failed to strike home. Even with my hatred suppressed, my intentions could be read. I would need to discard my hate, to divorce even my will to win from my actions. Only then would I be able to slay this super person. But the girl's bullets also failed to hit. Twisting through the air, fighting to keep hold of the case, she couldn't aim with perfect accuracy. Throwing away the bioweapon had been a split-second decision on my part. I hadn't spared an iota of consideration for the thousands who might die if the case broke open. Kanan trembled as an evil chill ran down her spine at the sight of me, standing on the train. There she saw, not another woman, but an angel of death. Inorganic destruction made flesh.
Kanan.
I rolled as I struck the ground, safeguarding the case with my body. The impact scattered my senses. I struggled to remain conscious as I bounced along, focusing on protecting my precious burden. If it broke open now, everything Siam and I had done would be for nothing. At last I slid to a stop and lay there, panting with exertion. I checked the case before I checked myself for injuries. I did it. The case was intact. Next, following standard protocol, I began assessing my own scrapes and bruises. The train! The grating screech of brakes filled the air. The wheels threw up a shower of sparks along the rails as the train receded. Already the battlefield we had shared was withdrawing into the unreachable. Siam. There was no sadness. We'd already made our farewells. Instead, I felt a grim contentment and a steely pride. Anyone with my abilities could have handled the challenges I faced. But Siam had been on the brink of death, Yet he had succeeded at a task that would have been difficult for anyone. He'd finished things as he'd lived. A trustworthy soldier to the very end. She had failed to retrieve the ore virus. The train had been stopped, and her test subject had gotten away. Never had she been so defeated. She had killed Siam and stoked the flames of conflict between two opposing camps. But those achievements didn't change the fact that the operation had been a failure. To be denied a single objective was, to her, a crushing loss. Failing on 3 counts was intolerable.
Alfred, it's too dangerous to stay here. Need to give the order to withdraw. Alfred,
One of her subordinates
Alfred,
was calling
narrate.
out from behind her.
One of my subordinates was calling out from behind me, but my attention remained focused on a point on the ground far and below. It was over. The UA in that case was, after all, only an old prototype. I had other options. There was a pharmaceutical firm already performing research on a superior form of the virus. There was no need to stay and risk capture for the sake of the virus. Take us down, I said. I want to make sure he's dead. But it was hard to take my eyes off the girl. The girl was crawling along the bare earth beside the track, a bitter reminder of a failure. My thoughts shifted back to Siam. The man had fallen from grace. In the 11th hour, he seemed to have braced that saying from the Quran, that for whosoever killeth a human being, it shall be as if he had killed all mankind. He'd refused to continue being a tool to that very end. Destroying him was no betrayal. I'd never regarded him as kin. My decision to eliminate him had been motivated by the simple fact that he'd been in my way. After all, as he said himself,
You're right, because you know what you are.
I smiled darkly as I recalled those words.
You're strong. You've attained a kind of perfection. You don't know failure. You can accomplish incredible things all on your own. But that magnificence is like a sterile room with nothing remaining within.
He was right. Yet he failed to understand that there'd never been anything there to begin with. I was an empty shell, with no false dignity to protect. I'd never had anything to lose but flesh and blood. Siam should have recognized this. The man was himself a broken being. I had never really been alive.
Alfard, you're unstoppable. But if, instead of striving for some empty goal, you could find something that truly matters to you, then you could be so much more.
It was laughable, really. Conflict was what mattered to me. That was my driving force. I had lost my family and discarded my past, retaining only what enabled me to survive. The ashes of my former self were scattered across the world, every weakness burned away in the crucible of conflict. I couldn't imagine anything but hatred for the rest of humankind. Now my eyes were like fire as I stared down at the girl below. Kanan might still be in range of the right kind of weapon. Hey, do you have any automatic rifles on board?
Negative. There are no mentoring rifles in our order.
I see. Never mind. Looks like this is your lucky day, little lady.
Off Arch. A ground support intercepted a transmission from Alman Air Traffic Control. A recon chopper has been dispatched from the Badia. We're out of time. You have to give the order to withdraw from the operations area.
Fine. Pull out. Head west. The helicopter circled around and headed westward, passing directly over the girl beside the tracks. As it did, Kanan and I exchanged a silent stare.
Boss, should get it looked at.
Ah, yes, of course. Down below, Kanan continued to stare, seeing in me a dark reflection of herself. Our origins were so similar. Two serpents, born from the same twisted nest, guided by the same mentor. And yet we had followed very different paths. We had no familial ties, yet we were sisters all the same, bound by a fate thicker than any blood. Kanan didn't take her eyes off the helicopter until it had disappeared over the horizon. Her hatred was a potent force. But even stronger now was her sense of duty. She would stop that terrorist. The girl who had possessed no goals had finally found a sense of determination born within her.
Jules.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to begin our descent. Please ensure that your seatbelt is fastened and that any electronic devices have been powered off.
Kanan.
I stirred. My eyes slowly drifted open. A long dream receded. I'd be on the ground within the hour. Once the plane landed, I'd disembark by a different route than the other passengers, and board a helicopter that should be waiting. I stretched and resettled, steeling my resolve. After the mission in Jordan, I'd gone to learn of a certain distinguished family wiped out in a political conflict, and how its sole surviving daughter had been trained as a mercenary. But that was a story from the past. It wasn't her story anymore. Right now, I just needed to head to Shibuya, save Maria, and put a stop to the Serpent's actions. Maria. I resisted the urge to hurry to my destination. Taking out my cell phone, I dialed up Maria's number. I knew it was a pointless act. Surely she'd be unable to answer the phone. Still, I couldn't resist the urge to try. What? Incredibly, the call connected. I gasped as if I'd seen a ghost. Maria? The sound of sobbing came through the receiver. Maria, is that really you? I didn't actually need to ask. I could tell just from the sound of the breathing it was Maria on the line. I felt a rush of joy. I wasn't too late after all. Thank goodness, oh thank goodness! Maria's voice was happy. Her tears were tears of joy. I let out a strained laugh, feeling that our positions had been strangely reversed. Maria had been concerned for my well-being. She heard in her happy sobs the sound of a dear friend who had somehow survived a long, harrowing day. Maria proceeded to put me on the phone with a man named Jack Stanley, a U.S. operative who'd helped keep Maria safe. In 10 minutes of hurried conversation, he brought me up to speed on the situation. The people of Shibuya had managed to stop the Uwa virus from running rampant through their city. But there was one worrisome detail. The CIA took Alfred into custody? It was Stanley's superior, Gordon, who'd escorted Alfred away. I recognized the name. I was certain that Gordon was one of the Serpent's collaborators. They're extraditing her to the US? I asked. Unofficially, with no due process? I was appalled at the naivete of the Japanese police. They hadn't arrested the terrorist, they'd merely taken her into custody. Thanks to Gordon's intervention, Alfred's whereabouts were now unknown. It'd be extremely difficult to track her down. Still, I bought myself an hour this morning that she wasn't expecting. I allowed myself a cautious smile. If Gordon was acting on his own, he'd have to use the airport. I probably had about 30 minutes left to act. For an ordinary person, that would be a hopeless situation. But I was not an ordinary person. At a facility with this many people, this many colors, the color of danger would stand out clear as day. All right, I said once Maria was back on the line. Leave the rest to me. Once this is all over, I'll head right over to see you. I hung up the phone. My anxious pacing had ceased, stilled by my steely determination to confront my enemy at last. Honestly, going around pretending that she's me? What an outrageous deception. Something had changed in the Serpent. She was toying with me far more than usual. Alright. If that's how she's gonna do things, I'll just have to pay her back in full. Went against my own sensibilities, but trickery seemed like the perfect tactic to use against these foes. Maria and her companions had been played like puppets. It was time to return the favor. The sound of propeller blades cut the air. Voices were barely audible beneath the door as the craft prepared for takeoff.
Panda.
Oh, excuse me, miss? Wait, might you be Miss Kanan?
The agent, obviously last-minute deployment, looked like a nervous wreck. His scent was startlingly harmless. He hardly seemed suited for the job. That's right. Are we ready to go?
Yes, of course. I just, well, I'm ready to fly, miss.
Is this your first time doing this sort of thing?
Yeah, my first mission. Thank you, miss.
I decided to ignore his bubbling. My first impulse was just to kick this dolt, but obviously I wouldn't. Since befriending Maria, I had become far less inclined to casually strike out at fools that got in my way. Do you have my firearms ready? I asked.
Well... Right, the guns. They've been prepared for you, of course. But, well, how do I put this?
I stared at him. Is there a problem? I asked.
Yes, it's kind of difficult to say. The situation you see just a little earlier, I heard that it was all clearly resolved.
I held my tongue. All part of it. Resolved? It seemed best to feign ignorance, just to be on the safe side. This man's color was trustworthy enough, but the hue of copter pilot on standby is hard to read. An unsightly blue, proof he'd had contact with the killer. Better play dumb. Couldn't risk blowing this golden opportunity. I'm sorry, but would you mind explaining? I asked.
Of course, just please don't be mad, okay?
The man explained the situation, profusely apologetical. He told her about the panic that had befallen Shibuya. The existence of Ua had been exposed. Alfred had been taken away by the CIA, and Maria Osawa was now under police protection. I see. Well then.
Yes. So, I guess this whole journey was pretty much a wasted trip for you, Miss Kanan.
He was a man of far too many words. No matter. I could still understand his unease from his perspective. She was an uninvited guest. To the good agent here, she was a meddler trying to usurp the CIA's rightful target. To the helicopter pilot, she was simply a nuisance who'd arrived a few minutes ahead of schedule. But the fact was that they were the ones who had no part to play on the stage. Not if my plan was going to work anyhow. Maria and the others had slipped through Alfred's fangs, unexpectedly providing me with one last chance. Now, it was up to me to seize it. Huh. Looks like Shibuya really was a poor fit for you, terrorist. I shrugged off a momentary twinge of self-doubt. Maria had survived so far without my help. It seemed a bit outrageous for her to get involved now. And this novice agent was right about one thing. My initial plan for the trip had, in fact, been a total waste. But still, I felt a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. Perhaps I had secretly been hoping it would come down to a single desperate encounter all along. Another moment when fate took a strange twist and everything changed. Like that hectic day in which I'd first met Maria. Cast my mind back to our first encounter. That unexpected brightness.
Let's be friends! Sadiki! How about it?
Felt like so long ago. I'd seen this wayward stranger, comforting color, the hue that felt inexplicably familiar. And suddenly, after all this time, I realized why. Sure, all right. How strange I'd never realized before. Maria shone with the same color as my older sister. No wonder she triggered so many memories of youth. I'd been isolated as a child, spending more and more time with my peculiar senses. I had remained close to my family. It was their warmth that had tied my strange self to the world around me. Maria didn't literally resemble my lost sister, but she had brought her warm color back into my life. There, in the prop wash of the waiting helicopter, I giggled despite myself. I felt ridiculous for only realizing something like this now, but I was glad that it had happened nonetheless.
Huh? Are you okay, ma'am?
The novice agent stared at me in confusion. I nodded reassuring. Maria was safe for now, but I still had one last job to do. I came here to save my friend, but since she's okay, I guess this will just be a regular visit. I took the gun I'd been provided. then flashed the agent a girlish smile. And really, isn't that so much better? Turning away from the hired chopper, I headed for the main concourse like an ordinary tourist. My journey was over now. I'd finally found something stronger than hatred. Isn't that right, Siam? Our parting seemed ages ago now. But I'd lived up to the training he'd given me. To be a warrior. To live for something greater than revenge. The training had gotten me to where I was now. I would not be something hollow like the serpent. I would hold my head high, strive to meet Siam's ideal, and fight for my future. We have one last game to play, Alphard. My old rival. Let's see which of us snakes will survive in the end. I'd come to protect Maria, the friend who'd shown me how to hope again. Now it was time for a final showdown. It was time to make that hope a reality.